My name is Evelyn Hart. I was 27 when I learned that loneliness and betrayal don't always arrive separately. The first guest was supposed to arrive at 4. By 4:15, the turkey had already begun cooling beneath its foil cover. By 4:30, I was checking my phone every few minutes, convincing myself there had been traffic, a delayed errand, some innocent explanation that would make everything feel normal again. Outside my apartment window, November sunlight faded into a pale orange haze. The dining table stood perfectly arranged. 8 place settings. 8 folded napkins. 8 handwritten name cards. I had spent nearly 3 weeks preparing for that Thanksgiving dinner. Not because I loved hosting, because I miss my family. The previous year had been difficult. My mother had undergone surgery. My younger brother had moved across the state. My sister barely answered messages anymore. Everyone seemed busy. Everyone seemed distant. I thought maybe one evening together could fix what had quietly broken. So I cooked. I cleaned. I decorated. I hoped. At 5 o'clock, my phone finally vibrated. Relief rushed through me. Then I opened the message. It was from my brother. A photograph. Nothing else. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then my stomach tightened. The picture showed my parents, my sister, my brother, their spouses, even my cousins, all gathered around another Thanksgiving table, smiling, laughing, together, without me. For several seconds, I simply stared, certain there had to be some mistake, a misunderstanding, a second gathering, anything. Then another message arrived. Happy Thanksgiving. Just those 2 words. Nothing more. No explanation. No apology. No invitation. The silence inside my apartment suddenly felt enormous. The candles flickered softly. The untouched chairs seemed to stare back at me. And for the first time in my life, I began wondering whether my family had intentionally left me behind. What I didn't know was that before the night ended, one person would walk through my door carrying an envelope that would change everything I believed about them. For almost an hour after receiving that photograph, I sat alone at the dining table. The turkey remained untouched. The mashed potatoes cooled into stiff, uneven peaks. Outside, darkness settled over the city one window at a time. I kept replaying possibilities in my head. Maybe they thought I was working. Maybe someone forgot to tell me about a change in plans. Maybe there had been a misunderstanding buried somewhere in a group message I never received. The human mind is remarkably creative when it's trying to protect itself from pain. I must have checked my phone 20 times. No new messages. No calls. No explanations. Just silence. The kind that slowly transforms confusion into something heavier. Something harder to ignore. I found myself staring at an old family photograph hanging near the hallway. It had been taken nearly 10 years earlier. My brother was making a ridiculous face. My sister was laughing. My mother had her hand resting on my shoulder. Back then, I would have described us as close. Not perfect, but close. Yet as I studied the picture, uncomfortable memories began surfacing. Small moments I had dismissed over the years. The family vacations I helped organize but was barely thanked for. The birthdays where I bought thoughtful gifts while receiving little more than generic cards. The holidays where I cooked, cleaned, and coordinated everything while others arrived as guests. At the time, I told myself families weren't supposed to keep score. Now I wasn't so sure. A sudden knock interrupted my thoughts. I glanced toward the door. For a moment, hope surged through me. Maybe someone had come to explain. Maybe they felt guilty. Maybe they realized what they'd done. I opened the door. Standing there was my grandfather. His gray coat was dusted with cold November rain. In one hand, he carried a worn leather envelope. In the other, a small paper bag that smelled faintly of pumpkin pie. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't sad. It was something far more unsettling. Disappointed. "Evelyn," he said quietly. I stepped aside. "Grandpa, what are you doing here?" He entered slowly, taking in the untouched table, the empty chairs, the abandoned celebration. His eyes lingered there longer than I expected. Then he looked back at me. I suspected this might happen. The words landed like stones. My chest tightened. What do you mean? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he placed the leather envelope on the table between us. The envelope looked old. Important. The corners were worn smooth from years of handling. Across the front, written in neat handwriting, was a date from nearly 8 years earlier. A date I recognized instantly. It was the year my grandmother passed away. I looked up at him. My heartbeat quickened. "Grandpa, what's inside?" He lowered himself into a chair. For several seconds, he simply stared at the envelope, as though deciding whether revealing the truth would help me or hurt me. Finally, he spoke. "Inside that envelope is the reason your family stopped seeing you as one of their own." The room suddenly felt smaller, quieter, and for the first time that evening, I realized this Thanksgiving betrayal hadn't started today. It had started years ago, and someone had been hiding the truth ever since. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for the envelope. For a moment, I didn't open it. I simply stared at it. The leather felt worn and strangely familiar beneath my fingertips, as if it had traveled through years of conversations I had never been allowed to hear. Across from me, Grandpa sat quietly. He wasn't the kind of man who rushed difficult moments. Even as a child, I remembered how he would let silence do its work before speaking. "What do you mean they stopped seeing me as one of their own?" I finally asked. His tired eyes met mine. "I wish I were wrong," he said softly. "I spent years hoping things would change." The answer only deepened the knot in my chest. Slowly, I opened the envelope. Inside were several folded papers. At the top was a letter written in my grandmother's handwriting. The sight of it instantly transported me back to childhood summers spent in her kitchen. I could almost smell cinnamon and tea. I could almost hear the soft scrape of her rocking chair against the wooden floor. With a shaky breath, I began reading. The letter wasn't about money. It wasn't about inheritance. It was about me. My grandmother described me as the family member who quietly held everyone together. She wrote about my patience, my reliability, and the way I often carried responsibilities that others avoided. Tears blurred my vision. Then I reached the final page. And everything changed. Attached to the letter was a copy of a legal document, a family trust. Next to several highlighted paragraphs were handwritten notes from my grandmother. The document explained that after her passing, a portion of family property and investments would eventually be placed under the supervision of the person she believed possessed the strongest judgment and sense of fairness. That person was me. I looked up, stunned. "I never knew about this." "I know," Grandpa replied. "What happened?" His jaw tightened. For the first time that evening, I saw genuine sadness cross his face. "Your parents and siblings found out." The words settled heavily between us. They believed the responsibility should have gone elsewhere. Some thought it should have been your brother. Others felt your mother should control everything. I stared at the pages. "But this doesn't even make me wealthy." "It was never about wealth," Grandpa said. "It was about trust." Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, old memories suddenly began rearranging themselves into a different picture. The growing distance. The unanswered messages. The strange coldness during holidays. The feeling that I was slowly becoming invisible. Maybe those things hadn't been random after all. Maybe they had been reactions to a decision I never even knew existed. Then Grandpa pointed toward another folded document near the bottom of the envelope. "I haven't shown that paper to anyone else." My stomach tightened again. "What is it?" His expression grew serious. "It's the record of a meeting your family thought nobody knew about." I carefully unfolded the final pages. The first sentence was enough to make my heart stop, because it revealed that years ago, someone in my family had tried to remove my name from Grandma's trust entirely. And the signature at the bottom was one I recognized immediately. For several seconds, I couldn't breathe. The signature at the bottom of the page belonged to my mother, not my brother, not some distant relative. My mother, the woman who used to braid my hair before school. The woman who stayed awake beside my bed when I had the flu. The woman whose approval I had spent years quietly chasing, even as it became harder and harder to earn. I read the signature 3 times, each time hoping I had somehow mistaken it. But I hadn't. The document wasn't a formal legal filing. It was a written request submitted during a family consultation shortly after my grandmother's death. Attached were notes from attorneys and trustees explaining why the request had been rejected. The reasoning was simple. My grandmother's instructions had been clear. They could not be altered. A cold realization settled over me. Someone had tried to remove me from a responsibility I never even knew existed. Not because I had done something wrong, but because they didn't want me to have it. Grandpa watched quietly as I continued reading. There were meeting summaries, email excerpts, handwritten notes. One passage caught my attention immediately. Concern expressed that Evelyn's position may create imbalance within the family. Imbalance. The word lingered in my mind. I thought about all the years that followed. Every holiday where I was treated as an afterthought. Every family decision made without me. Every celebration I learned about after it happened. Had they been trying to create distance? Or justify it? I don't understand, I whispered. If Grandma trusted me, why didn't anyone tell me? Grandpa lowered his eyes. Because some people feared what that trust represented. The answer hurt more than I expected. Not because of the trust itself. Because it suggested something deeper. Maybe the issue was never property. Maybe it was recognition. Grandma had seen something in me that others either couldn't see or didn't want acknowledged. For years, I had interpreted their behavior as a reflection of my own shortcomings. Maybe I wasn't interesting enough. Maybe I wasn't successful enough. Maybe I wasn't lovable enough. Now those assumptions began cracking apart. The silence that followed felt strangely different. Painful, yes, but also clarifying. For the first time in years, I wasn't searching for excuses. I was looking directly at the truth. Then Grandpa reached into his coat pocket and removed a small notebook. Its cover was faded blue. I recognized it immediately. It had belonged to Grandma. I almost forgot, he said softly. She wanted you to have this one day. I carefully took the notebook. Inside were years of personal reflections, observations, and letters she had never mailed. As I turned the pages, one entry stopped me cold. The date was written just 6 months before she passed away. And in the first paragraph, Grandma described a conversation she had overheard, one that revealed exactly why certain members of the family resented me. The explanation wasn't about money. It wasn't about inheritance. It was something far more personal, and somehow even more heartbreaking. I sat frozen at the table, Grandma's notebook open in front of me. The pages smelled faintly of old paper and lavender, a scent that instantly pulled me back to her small sunlit living room. For years, that room had felt like the safest place in the world. Now, as rain tapped softly against the windows, I began reading the entry she had written 6 months before her death. At first, the words seemed ordinary. She described a family gathering, coffee cups, half-finished conversations, people moving in and out of the kitchen. Then her tone changed. Today, I overheard something that broke my heart, she wrote. My eyes moved slowly across the page. According to her notes, she had accidentally heard a private conversation between several family members. The topic wasn't money. It wasn't inheritance. It was me. Grandma wrote that someone had said I made others look bad, without even trying. Another voice had agreed. Not because I was perfect, but because I was dependable. I remembered stopping what I was doing to help whenever someone called. Driving long distances when relatives needed assistance. Covering responsibilities during emergencies. Remembering birthdays. Checking on people. Listening. The things I considered normal acts of love. Grandma's notes revealed that some family members interpreted those same actions differently. To them, every comparison felt uncomfortable. Every compliment directed toward me felt like criticism of them. The realization hit me with unexpected force. I had spent years believing I wasn't enough. Meanwhile, some people had quietly resented me for qualities I never realized were being measured. I turned another page. There, Grandma had written something underlined twice. The saddest kind of jealousy is the kind that grows inside a family. It rarely announces itself. It simply turns warmth into distance. I felt tears forming again. Not because I felt victorious. Because suddenly so many years made sense. The forgotten invitations. The dismissive comments. The emotional distance that appeared without explanation. None of it had happened overnight. It had grown slowly, quietly, like a crack spreading beneath a foundation. Across the table, Grandpa remained silent, giving me space, giving me time. Finally, I looked up. Did everyone feel this way? He shook his head immediately. No. That single word brought an unexpected sense of relief. Because deep down, I didn't want to believe every relationship had been false. Grandpa sighed. Some followed the crowd. Some stayed silent. A few genuinely cared but didn't know how to challenge what was happening. His answer felt painfully human. Not villains. Not monsters. Just flawed people making poor choices over many years. Then, he pointed toward the final section of the notebook. Read the last pages. I turned forward. The handwriting looked weaker there. More fragile. As if Grandma already knew her time was limited. And in those final pages, she described a plan she had quietly put in place before her death. A plan that was never meant to punish anyone. A plan designed to reveal the truth when the time was right. And, according to her notes, that time had finally arrived. The final pages of Grandma's notebook were written in a shakier hand. The neat confidence that filled the earlier entries had softened, as though each sentence required more effort than the last. Yet the message itself was remarkably clear. She knew something was changing within the family, and she knew she would not be around long enough to repair it herself. I read slowly, careful not to miss a single word. Families do not break all at once, she wrote. They drift apart one silence at a time. The sentence settled deep inside me, because it perfectly described the previous 8 years. No dramatic argument. No explosive betrayal. Just countless small moments of exclusion, avoidance, and distance. Then I reached the section Grandpa had mentioned. The plan. At first, it seemed surprisingly simple. Grandma had instructed the trustees overseeing the family trust to delay transferring certain responsibilities until they could observe how family members treated one another without expecting a reward. She wanted actions, not promises, to reveal character. No one knew the full criteria. Not even the relatives involved. The trustees simply watched, recorded, evaluated, year after year. My pulse quickened. Attached to the notebook was another document, a summary report. I immediately recognized several dates. Family holidays, birthdays, major life events. There were notes about participation, cooperation, communication, and support among family members. The report wasn't judging who was successful. It wasn't measuring income or status. It focused on something far less visible. Consistency. Who showed up for others when there was nothing to gain. Who maintained relationships. Who offered support without expecting recognition. I felt strangely uncomfortable reading it, because many of the examples listed involved me. Not grand gestures. Small things. Phone calls. Hospital visits. Helping relatives move. Checking on Grandpa after Grandma died. The ordinary acts I never thought anyone noticed. Apparently someone had. Grandma had. And eventually so had the trustees. I looked at Grandpa. You're saying she planned for the truth to reveal itself? He nodded. She believed time exposes motives better than arguments ever could. The room grew quiet again. I stared at the documents scattered across the table. For years, I had carried the weight of rejection. I had assumed something was wrong with me. Now I was confronting a far more complicated reality. Sometimes people distance themselves not because you failed them, but because your presence reminds them of choices they'd rather not examine. Then Grandpa reached for his coffee and hesitated. There's one more thing. My stomach tightened. What? The trustees contacted me last month. I felt my heartbeat quicken. Why? His expression turned thoughtful, almost solemn. Because next week, the final review concludes. I blinked. What review? He looked directly at me. The one Grandma set in motion years ago. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. Inside, I realized that Thanksgiving dinner wasn't the end of a story. It was only the moment before everything hidden would finally come into the open. And within 7 days, My entire family would learn what Grandma had been quietly watching all along. The week that followed felt strangely unreal. For years, I had wanted answers. Now that they were finally within reach, I wasn't sure I was ready for them. I returned to work on Monday and tried to focus on spreadsheets, meetings, and deadlines. But every quiet moment pulled me back to Grandma's notebook, the trust documents, and the empty Thanksgiving table that still lingered in my mind like a photograph I couldn't stop seeing. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened. My phone started ringing. First, it was my sister, then my brother, then my mother. People who had gone months without meaningful conversation suddenly wanted to talk. At first, I wondered if guilt had finally caught up with them, but the timing felt too precise, too coordinated. Each conversation followed a similar pattern: awkward small talk, careful questions, an unusual interest in how I had been doing. No one mentioned Thanksgiving. No one apologized. Yet beneath every word, I sensed a nervousness that hadn't existed before, as though they knew something important was approaching. By Thursday afternoon, Grandpa called. "The trustees have scheduled the meeting." My chest tightened. When? Saturday. The next 2 days passed painfully slowly. When Saturday finally arrived, I drove to a small conference building on the edge of town. Nothing about it looked dramatic. No courtroom. No grand hall. Just a quiet meeting room with large windows overlooking a winter garden. Yet the atmosphere inside felt heavier than any place I'd ever entered. My parents were already there. So was my brother, my sister, several relatives. No one seemed comfortable. Conversations stopped when I walked in. Eyes shifted, then quickly looked away. I took a seat near Grandpa. For a moment, nobody spoke. The silence felt familiar. The same silence that had existed for years. Only now, it seemed impossible to hide behind it. A representative from the trust entered and placed several folders on the table. His voice remained calm and professional. He explained that the review process established by my grandmother had officially concluded. The purpose, he said, was never to reward one person or punish another. It was designed to preserve her values: family responsibility, integrity, consistency, compassion. Then, he opened the final report. As he summarized years of observations, a pattern emerged. Not perfect behavior, not flawless decisions. Simply evidence of who had continued investing in relationships even when no recognition followed, who remained present, who remained dependable, who remained kind. The room grew increasingly quiet. No one interrupted. No one argued. Because the facts weren't accusations. They were records. Moments. Choices. Years of them. Finally, the representative closed the folder. Then, he turned toward me. The review confirmed exactly what Mrs. Hart believed many years ago. My heart pounded. Across the table, my family sat motionless, waiting, listening. And for the first time in nearly a decade, everyone was about to hear the truth spoken aloud. Not by me, not by Grandpa, but by the evidence they could no longer ignore. The room remained perfectly still. Even the faint hum of the heating system seemed louder than usual. The representative looked around the table before continuing. No one spoke. No one looked eager. For the first time in years, there was nowhere for anyone to hide from the truth. The review confirmed, he said calmly, that Evelyn consistently demonstrated the qualities Mrs. Hart considered essential to preserving both the trust and the family's long-term well-being. The words themselves weren't dramatic, but their weight settled over the room like falling snow. Gentle, unavoidable, final. He explained that my grandmother's instructions would remain unchanged. The responsibility she had chosen for me years ago would officially pass to me. Not because I was the most successful, not because I was the smartest, not because I was perfect, but because over time, my actions had reflected the values she hoped would survive long after she was gone. I expected to feel victorious. Instead, I felt sad. Because as I looked around the room, I realized how much energy I'd spent trying to earn love that should never have required proof. My mother sat quietly, staring at the table. My brother looked exhausted. My sister's eyes glistened with tears. No one argued. No one challenged the findings. There was nothing left to challenge. The years had already spoken. Then something unexpected happened. My mother finally looked up. For a moment, she seemed older than I had ever seen her. Not physically, emotionally, as though she had been carrying something heavy for a very long time. "I'm sorry, Evelyn." The words were barely above a whisper, yet they filled the room. No excuses followed. No justifications. No attempts to rewrite history. Just 3 simple words. I had imagined that moment many times over the years. I thought it would heal everything. It didn't, but it opened a door. And sometimes that is where healing begins. One by one, other family members spoke. Some apologized. Some admitted they had remained silent when they should have spoken up. Others simply acknowledged the distance that had grown between us. Not every wound disappeared. Not every relationship was repaired that day. Real life rarely works that way. But honesty finally entered a room that had been crowded with avoidance for years. When the meeting ended, people slowly drifted toward the parking lot. The winter sky had cleared. Soft sunlight filtered through bare tree branches. Grandpa and I lingered behind. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he handed me Grandma's notebook one last time. Inside the back cover, tucked between 2 pages, I discovered a note I hadn't seen before. Just a few lines, written in her familiar handwriting. "The purpose of truth is not to win. The purpose of truth is to free people from carrying what was never theirs to carry." I read the sentence twice, then a third time, and suddenly I understood. For years, I had carried responsibility for other people's choices, other people's insecurities, other people's distance. I had mistaken their behavior for a reflection of my worth. It never was. As Grandpa and I walked toward the parking lot, the afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the pavement. For the first time in nearly a decade, those shadows didn't feel heavy. They simply existed, like memories, like lessons, like chapters that had finally reached their ending. That Thanksgiving began with an empty table, but it ended with something far more valuable than a crowded room. It ended with clarity. And sometimes, clarity is the quietest form of peace a person can find. Months later, the place cards from that forgotten Thanksgiving still sat in a small box inside my closet. I never threw them away, not because they reminded me of betrayal, but because they reminded me of a truth I would never forget. The people who truly value you should never need a document, a trust, or a revelation to recognize your place in their lives. And from that day forward, neither would I. Sometimes the deepest wounds don't come from strangers. They come from the people we trust most. But this story reminds us that our worth is not determined by how others treat us. In the end, truth has a way of revealing itself, and peace comes when we stop carrying burdens that were never ours to bear. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced a moment when the truth changed everything? We'd love to hear your story. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.